This is the 8.8 centimeters flak gun, a weapon built to fight the sky, yet feared most on the ground. Its shells ripped through armor at ranges other guns could barely touch. Its recoil shook the soil beneath it. Its accuracy forced full armored units to rethink how they moved forward. And why serving behind it demanded more than bravery. It demanded acceptance of the cost. Its story began long before these tanks were torn apart. And that story is where our journey starts. In the early years of the 1930s, Germany moved in silence. The Treaty of Versailles still restricted its weapons. Yet many leaders believed another war was coming. Factories meant to build tractors quietly shifted toward military parts. Designers met behind closed doors. Engineers worked under fake names. All of this was done to rebuild an army that officially was not allowed to exist. Among the secret projects pushed ahead was a new kind of cannon meant to fight enemies that could not be reached from the ground. High-flying bombers. Aviation had changed fast after the First World War. Aircraft were no longer slow, fragile machines that barely crossed trenches. Bombers grew stronger every year. They could carry heavier loads, climb higher into the sky, and travel far beyond the safety of ground troops. Many military thinkers feared these planes more than tanks or soldiers. They imagined a single formation wiping out a city block in minutes. Engineers were told to create a gun that could fire a shell high enough, fast enough, and precise enough to stop these aircraft before they dropped their bombs. The task went to Crew, a company known for heavy weapons. At first, progress was slow. Designers struggled to balance weight, precision, and strength. Some early models shook so badly the barrels cracked. Others could not turn fast enough to track a plane moving across the sky. Each failure taught a lesson, but each one also showed the size of the threat they were trying to stop. If bombers reached German cities without defense, the result would be ruin. Slowly, a new shape appeared on the drawing boards. It was a long barrel cannon with a smooth recoil system and a smart four-legged carriage that let it turn any direction. The team focused on raw power. They lengthened the barrel to fire shells at extreme speed. They reinforced the breech to handle larger charges. They added elevation controls so the gun could aim almost straight up. Every part served one goal: place a timed fuse shell in the path of a fast, distant aircraft. When the gun stood finished on the test range, and it did not yet look like the legend it would become. It appeared strange, almost too large. Still, the engineers felt early confidence. They fired at targets hanging from balloons, then at moving dummies. They studied how fast the barrel heated and how often parts failed. After every test, changes followed. The team improved the sights, reinforced the carriage legs, and rebuilt the controls. Each change pushed the weapon closer to the strength needed for war. By the middle of the decade, the cannon received its official name, the 8.8 centimeters Flak 18. The title sounded plain, but within military ranks, it carried weight. It meant Germany now held a fast-firing anti-aircraft gun made for a future war many expected, but few said aloud. Crews began training in remote fields far from cities. Officers taught them to move as one around the massive weapon. 10 men learned to load, aim, judge distance, and set fuses while orders echoed from a central controller. Every action required speed. Every error decided whether a bomber fell or flew on. As training grew, the state increased funding. Factories produced more barrels, mounts, and special tools. New units appeared nationwide. Many officers thought the gun would serve mainly as a warning, meant to keep enemy planes at a distance. Even fewer realized how exposed crews would be while operating a weapon visible from miles away. The first sign of its true power came sooner than planned. Germany sent a small number of Flak 18 guns to Spain during the Civil War to aid allies. The goal was not just politics, but testing. Engineers needed real battle results, and Spain provided them. The gun showed strengths that shocked both sides. The fast shells threatened aircraft and smashed bunkers and light armor. Crews learned it could switch targets fast thanks to its rotating base. They also learned how easy it was to spot when firing. Dust clouds, bright flashes, and tall shapes made every position an easy mark for guns and planes. The weapon was strong, flexible, and precise. But the men running it faced danger the moment fighting grew intense. Officers praised its power, yet warned of the risks crews faced. These lessons shaped later tactics and revealed a grim truth. A large gun seen from the air would draw fire from bombers, fighters, tanks, and troops. Crews had no armor, no shield, and no safety beyond shallow pits dug around the base. Back home, command studied these results and ordered upgrades. Engineers added better sights, tougher barrels, and mounts that deployed faster. The gun advanced quickly, but the war ahead grew faster still. Production surged. Training schools filled with soldiers learning fuses, range tools, and heavy shells. Beneath the progress lay urgency. Tension spread across Europe, conflicts grew, and nearly everyone in the Luftwaffe knew that if war began, by the late 1930s, by then, the Flak 18 had become a sign of modern air defense. It stood at airfields, near factories, and along coastal positions. Crews trained day and night, following imagined targets across the sky. No one yet knew how long those barrels would stay hot or how many crews would fall beside them. The weapon was ready. The crews were prepared. What they could not see was that the future held battles far larger than the designers ever imagined. The skies of Europe were about to become the most dangerous battlefield of the war. When the first shipment of 8.8 centimeters guns arrived in Spain during the Civil War, the crews brought more curiosity than confidence. Many had trained only in quiet fields back in Germany, where skies were calm and range officers controlled every move. In Spain, everything felt different. Dust hung in the heat. Distant gunfire echoed through the hills. The air itself seemed to warn that this place would reveal the gun's true nature. For the first time since its creation, the cannon stood on real ground shaped by real war. The weapon was placed on high ridges overlooking battle zones where aircraft and armored columns moved without warning. Crews learned fast that nothing stayed still for long. One moment the enemy came from the sky, the next they rushed across open land. The 88 had been built for high-flying bombers. But war rarely followed plans. When planes appeared, the long barrel swung upward. When armored trucks or fortified positions blocked advancing forces, the gun lowered again, ready to fire at ground targets. These sudden changes forced crews to adapt faster than training allowed. As days passed, Spanish observers noted how the shells traveled across great distances. They struck with shocking speed, and the accuracy impressed even veteran officers. Each shot sent waves of heat through the crew. Dust rings lifted around the carriage legs. Spent shells flew out, glowing as they hit the ground. Every time the breech snapped open, it rang with sharp metal echoes across the valleys. These sights and sounds became part of daily life, reminding crews they controlled a machine built for more than one role. The gun worked well against aircraft, but its true shock came when crews saw how easily it destroyed bunkers and armored vehicles. Tanks of that era carried light armor, and the high-speed shells punched through with brutal force. Reports spoke of armor plates bending like thin sheets and turrets blown open by delayed blasts. These findings reached Germany fast. Engineers felt pride, but also fear. Their air defense gun had become a weapon for many roles, and that meant crews would face greater danger in future wars. Fighting in Spain revealed another truth training never showed. When the 88 fired, its position was exposed instantly. The flash at the muzzle, the rising smoke, and the clear outline of the long barrel formed a signature that could be seen from far away. Artillery crews used these signs to aim their fire at the gun. Enemy aircraft learned to hunt for the bright flashes to guide strafing attacks. Even foot soldiers began to recognize the shape of the carriage legs along ridgelines. Once spotted, the crew had to move fast or risk being hit before reloading. Many units dug shallow pits around the gun, but these gave little safety. The cannon was too large, too open, and too demanding to run behind heavy cover. Some crews faced shelling moments after firing at enemy planes. Explosive rounds landed nearby, throwing dirt and metal that wounded men still aiming sights or lifting shells. Working in the open became a danger no one could ignore. Although the 88 had a small shield to block fragments, it protected only a narrow front area. Anyone stepping aside for a better angle lost that cover. Still, the crews kept working because the weapon was needed, and the fighting left no room to pause. Despite the risks, the campaign in Spain taught German officers key lessons beyond smaller air defense guns. They saw how fast the weapon could change roles during moving battles. They tracked how barrels wore down after long firing periods and adjusted repair plans. They improved transport methods so the gun could be moved in shorter time gaps. Each lesson helped refine tactics that later shaped Army and air defense doctrine. Combat experience also drove upgrades. Range tools were improved to help crews track aircraft better. Fuse setting devices were redesigned to cut errors during rush fire. The carriage was reinforced to stay steady under non-stop shooting. Slowly, the gun changed from its early form into a more dependable and deadlier machine. These updates did not remove its flaws, but they balanced power, speed, and survival. Each shell was heavy, and crews lifted dozens in one fight. The gun demanded constant care. Elevation wheels needed steady adjustment. Fuse timers required careful hands. Shells had to move from crates to breech in a fast, unbroken rhythm. The focus needed in combat left many men exhausted after each action. For some, fatigue led to errors, and errors could be deadly when explosives were involved. After months of fighting, officers decided the weapon was too valuable to stay only in air defense. Its strong effect against armor meant it could be needed far beyond its original role. Lessons from Spain pushed High Command to expand production and prepare more units for use across Europe. The crews who survived returned with knowledge shaped by fire and steel, not theory. Their reports spread through training schools, where new soldiers studied every detail. The 88 had proven itself, and the stage was set for a much larger war. Around Germany, the world moved closer to conflict each month, and planners knew the skies would soon become battlefields on a scale far greater than Spain. No one yet understood how vast the struggle would grow or how many crews would later fall beside the guns they served. Still, the first signs were already there. Spain had been the rehearsal. When war finally broke across Europe in 1939, the 8.8 centimeters gun was no longer a trial weapon or a foreign test piece. It now stood in hundreds of positions across Germany, Poland, and soon much of the occupied land. Factories pushed output higher. Training fields turned into full units. Crews who once trained under empty skies now lived with the real chance that bomber groups could appear at any moment. Early in the war, Allied air power was still limited, but that balance would shift fast as fighting spread. The gun proven in Spain became part of a wider, more complex defense system. German control of the air made it rare for enemy aircraft to reach deep targets at first. Some batteries waited days for an air raid that never came. During those pauses, guns were turned to other duties, supporting infantry assaults or breaking hardened defenses. Crews shifted roles with little warning, just as they had learned earlier. Now, however, everything was larger. A gun set near a village one evening could be ordered to move before sunrise. As the war rolled into Western Europe, Luftwaffe dominance allowed ground forces to advance quickly. Many flak crews traveled with armored units to guard columns from sudden attacks. They moved by half-tracks, trucks, or horse-drawn wagons, depending on terrain. Movement became vital. The 88 was heavy, but its mount made it more flexible than expected. Each redeployment exposed crews to stray fire and enemy scouts watching for weak moments before positions were secured. Still, the early months favored Germany, and crews worked with controlled tension rather than constant fear. That balance collapsed when large Allied bombing campaigns began against German cities. Britain and later the United States launched raids that grew in scale and frequency. Skies over factories filled with hundreds of aircraft. Nights echoed with engines and burned with the glow of fires below. It was then that the 88's true role became clear. Crews who once waited in silence now fired through entire nights, round after round into darkness. New fire control systems changed everything. Large mechanical computers sat inside reinforced bunkers near the guns. They linked to range tools, sound systems, and later radar. Data flowed through thick cables. Instead of guessing speed and height, Central Command calculated impact points and sent them directly to the crews. Multiple guns could now engage one target at once. Crews moved like parts of a single machine, turning wheels, setting fuses, and loading shells by instinct. Even with this coordination, striking a bomber was never easy. Aircraft flew high, and moved fast. Crews had to aim not at the plane itself, but at a point ahead, where the shell would explode after climbing for seconds. A tiny mistake in timing or angle could mean missing the formation completely. The Germans still relied mostly on timed fuses, which needed careful adjustment just before each round entered the breach. Under the roar of the sky and the shake of explosions, small errors became common. Yet the guns kept firing, because every missed shot still sent a cloud of steel fragments through the paths of incoming bombers. The skies became an arena of punishment for both sides. Bomber crews spoke of the terror of black clouds of flak surrounding their planes. German crews felt the same fear from below as bombs rained toward them. Many batteries worked in exposed areas, rooftops, factory grounds, or open fields, where a direct hit meant instant destruction. The 88's explosive muzzle flash made each gun a clear target for enemy planes above. Even with trenches or sandbag walls, crews stayed vulnerable to falling dirt and flying debris. Daylight raids made danger worse. Fighter bombers strafed positions with cannons and rockets. Crews constantly shifted between firing at the sky and ducking low to avoid being hit. Ammunition carriers, fuse setters, and site operators moved openly, easy targets for anyone searching for exposed teams. Over time, the noise, shaking, and constant threat wore down morale. Even veteran operators admitted that long battles felt like the sky itself was collapsing. By 1942 and 1943, the pressure on flak units reached a breaking point. Germany's industrial centers, Ruhr, Hamburg, Berlin, faced non-stop raids. Some nights, batteries fired until barrels glowed red. Crews wrapped cloth around their hands to protect them from the burning metal. Ammunition trucks arrived as quickly as they emptied. Engineers replaced barrels more often than ever. Yet the bombers came back night after night. As Allied accuracy improved and new tactics appeared, crews faced greater danger. Some bombers dropped fragmentation bombs above gun positions. Others used flares to light up defensive areas. Radar jamming disrupted German fire control, forcing crews to rely more on sight alone. With limited visibility and rising stress, mistakes became more common and casualties mounted. The system that once gave Germany confidence now struggled under constant attack. By this stage, the sky was no longer a distant threat. It had become the war's most active front, where crews lived and died in moments of noise, smoke, and blinding flashes. Each raid left scars on both the land and the men defending it. And yet, this was only half the story. As the ground war grew and enemy armor strengthened, the 88 faced a new challenge, fighting not just above, but across the field in front of the crews. As the conflict moved into new regions, the role of the 8.8 centimeters gun shifted in ways few had imagined during its earliest days. The cannon had been built to guard the skies over Germany. Yet battles on the ground forced crews to lower the long barrel and face threats rolling toward them instead of flying overhead. During campaigns in France and later North Africa, German forces met enemy tanks with armor far thicker than anything seen in Spain. Many frontline anti-tank guns were too small to pierce this new protection. Crews tried the standard 37mm and 50mm weapons, but shells often bounced off, leaving only scorch marks. In these moments, commanders began sending the 88 into direct line-of-sight fights, where accuracy and raw power mattered more than altitude or timing. The first major test came early in the French campaign. Heavily armored British and French vehicles pressed forward across fields the Germans thought they controlled. When lighter guns failed, officers ordered 88 crews to reposition quickly. The long barrels, normally aimed at the sky, now pointed across open terrain. The shift was dramatic. A gun meant for distant aircraft was now aimed directly at steel giants advancing through smoke. Crews watched enemy tanks stop suddenly, tracks broken or turrets blown open as rounds tore through them. The immediate effect drew the attention of many German commanders, who realized the gun had far more potential than anyone had predicted. North Africa offered an even clearer stage for the 88's evolution. Wide open deserts created long firing lanes. Enemy tanks moved across sunlit plains with little cover, giving crews both time and visibility. The gun's long range became a deadly advantage. Tanks trying to flank often found themselves hit by distant shells that struck with immense force. German units began placing the gun directly with armored divisions, behind tanks or on ridges, to catch vehicles in deadly crossfire. This strategy allowed smaller German forces to hold ground against larger Allied formations. But this new role carried extreme danger for the crew. When used against aircraft, the 88 usually fired from deep defensive positions. As an anti-tank weapon, it had to operate much closer to the fight. Crews now faced tank shells, machine gun bursts, and artillery fire. Unlike tanks, the gun had no armor, and the small shield offered minimal protection. To fire effectively, the crew had to stay in the open, moving ammunition, adjusting sights, and operating controls while enemy rounds landed around them. If tanks advanced faster than expected, crews had only moments to decide whether to stay and fire or abandon the position. Battles on the Eastern Front made these dangers even worse. When German forces faced Soviet armor, especially early models with thick, sloped plates, smaller anti-tank guns became almost useless at a distance. Crews dug shallow pits or hid behind farm buildings, but these makeshift defenses rarely survived the chaos of battle. Soviet tank units advanced in large numbers, often backed by infantry and artillery. When an 88 fired, it could destroy several vehicles in quick succession. Yet every shot revealed the gun's position to nearby enemies. Crews learned that each hit made return fire almost certain. Many positions were destroyed just minutes after opening fire. The 88's effectiveness forced Germany to rethink armor tactics. Engineers built new tanks and tank destroyers mounting improved versions of the gun. These machines brought the 88's firepower inside armored shells that protected crews. Yet the original towed guns remained vital. They were easier to mass-produce, simpler to move, and already familiar to thousands of soldiers. Even as turreted tanks entered battle, the towed 88 continued to anchor defensive lines across Europe. Operating it on the ground took immense physical and mental effort. The weapon was heavy, and moving it in combat required teamwork. Ammunition boxes weighed enough to slow even the strongest men. During long engagements, crews were soaked with sweat and dirt while keeping the gun loaded and ready. The roar of incoming shells, the sight of advancing tanks, and the pressure to fire accurately created an environment where mistakes could be fatal. Despite this, many crews became highly skilled. Experienced operators could strike distant targets with surprising precision, even under heavy fire. As the war continued, enemies improved their tactics. Allied tank crews maneuvered cautiously, used smoke, and spread out to avoid easy hits. They coordinated with artillery to target suspected 88 positions. Crews tried nets, branches, and sandbags for cover, but these worked only until the first shot gave them away. The muzzle flash remained a glaring weakness, and once spotted, the gun often faced overwhelming retaliation. By the middle of the war, the 88 had earned a fearsome reputation among Allied tank crews. Many called it one of the deadliest threats on the battlefield. Stories spread quickly of tanks destroyed at ranges few expected. The more effective the gun became, the more aggressively enemies targeted it. Entire crews sometimes fell after firing only a few rounds. Survivors carried memories of shattered positions, ruined equipment, and fallen comrades. The 88's transformation from anti-aircraft weapon to tank killer shaped the land war. It allowed German forces to hold ground longer than expected and to challenge armored advances that might have broken through. But this change also put crews directly into some of the most intense and deadly fighting. The weapon's power brought both strength and risk. As the war shifted, crews soon faced a new chapter where skies and ground were equally deadly, and the number of surviving operators began to drop sharply. By the middle years of the war, control of the air had completely changed. What had once been a battlefield shaped by German initiative became a constant fight to survive. Waves of Allied bombers came day and night. Industrial centers driving the German war effort became prime targets. Entire regions lived under the constant hum of distant engines, knowing its signaled destruction moving toward them. For the flak crews, this marked the start of the most dangerous period they would ever face. Tension filled every position, every hour. Large-scale raids grew until horizons were filled. British night bombers stretched long strings of red and white lights across the darkness, like floating cities in formation. Each wave carried hundreds of aircraft, often with fighter escorts ready to strike any position that revealed itself. Against this massive force, flak guns fired continuously, trying to create barriers of explosions thick enough to push bombers away or tear gaps in their formations. Pressure mounted as each missed burst meant more bombs falling on the cities behind them. The work became exhausting. A gun that once fired a few rounds now had to fire hundreds, sometimes thousands, during extended raids. Barrels heated until they glowed orange. Crews wrapped cloth around elevation wheels and controls to protect their hands. Ammunition haulers ran back and forth with crates twice their weight, moving quickly despite cold or rubble. Fuse setters worked with shaking fingers as the ground shook with explosions. Gears clicked, the breech slammed, and recoil shot into the carriage repeatedly, turning every minute into a test of endurance. Even with advanced fire control, accuracy suffered under stress. Bombers used radar jamming to disrupt calculations. Flares dropped from aircraft created false light that confused observers. Some raids released long strips of foil, scattering in the wind, reflecting radar and filling screens with noise. Rangefinders struggled, forcing crews to rely on skill rather than clear instructions. Crews fought not just aircraft, but the fog of electronic warfare hiding the enemy in plain sight. Allied forces soon realized how dangerous the 88 remained and adapted their plans to destroy these guns whenever possible. Some bombers carried fragmentation bombs designed to shred crews even without a direct hit. Fighter bombers flew low, strafing with cannons and rockets. The roar of diving engines became one of the most feared sounds for flak operators. Many positions took casualties before the first shell could even be loaded. Danger extended beyond direct attacks. Bombers struck factories, rail yards, and city centers. Many flak batteries were near these targets, putting crews close to the explosions. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread through industrial areas. Shock waves shattered windows across neighborhoods. Even if the gun survived, crews had to work through smoke, debris, and poor visibility. Yet they fired on, because the sky still held enemy planes. As casualties rose, the Luftwaffe needed replacements. Experienced crews became rare. Younger men, often teenagers, filled the gaps. Many came from Hitler Youth or from schools evacuated from cities. They learned quickly, because the situation left them little choice. Some were assigned to fuse setting stations or ammunition handling. Others took positions on the elevation wheels or behind the breech, trying to match the movements of older, experienced soldiers. Hands shook from both cold and the knowledge that their survival rate was among the lowest in the entire German military. Women also joined flak units, mainly as spotters, communications operators, and radar assistants. They worked alongside men to track bombers, calculate firing solutions, and direct batteries. Though they rarely handled the gun itself, they faced many of the same dangers. Bombs did not discriminate. A single strike on a command post or radar station could wipe out dozens in an instant. As raids intensified, communication centers became top targets for Allied aircraft trying to disrupt the defensive network. In some cities, explosions shook the ground so often that crews slept beside their guns, unwilling to move far from their posts. Tunnels and basements offered only partial safety. Constant alarms, the glow of burning districts, and the fear that the next raid could destroy an entire battery left marks on the men. Fatigue caused accidents. Some mishandled fuses, others dropped shells, a few collapsed from exhaustion, unable to continue. Mental pressure mounted, as each night brought new losses. By late 1943 into 1944, survival rates for many flak crews plummeted. Units near strategic points, oil refineries, rail hubs, submarine pens, faced the highest risk. These sites were attacked relentlessly because their destruction weakened Germany's war effort. Flak crews stood between these targets and the bombers. Every time they fired, they revealed their position, increasing the chance of incoming fire. Some batteries were wiped out completely. Others lost crew members faster than they could be replaced. The collapse of the skies marked a turning point. The once strong, organized anti-aircraft network now faced an unstoppable force. Yet, even under near-hopeless conditions, crews continued to operate their guns. They followed orders, adjusted sights, loaded shells, and watched the sky fill with tracer streams and dark clouds of bursting flak. Their determination slowed destruction, but the cost grew heavier every month. What came next pushed them further. The final year of the war brought massive flak towers and desperate last stands in cities already burning. Germany faced a reality many leaders had long denied. Allied air power now reached deep into every major city. Industries burned, transport networks collapsed, and wide areas lay in ruins. The anti-aircraft network, once spread across thousands of positions, was weakened by losses, shortages, and constant raids. In response, High Command relied on massive concrete flak towers. These buildings rose like silent giants above the cities, offering heavy firepower and shelter for civilians. Thick, reinforced concrete walls resisted direct hits from heavy bombs. Each tower had multiple levels: ammunition rooms, command centers, hospitals, and living quarters. On the roof stood the large guns, including powerful 12.8 centimeters dual mounts, supported by 88 mm cannons and smaller automatic weapons. When a raid began, the towers came alive. Crews sprinted up staircases, spotter teams activated radar units, while operators prepared firing data and civilians hurried into underground sections. The entire structure functioned like a vertical warship anchored within the city. For many flak crews, assignment to a tower was a mix of luck and burden. On one hand, the walls offered far more protection than open-air positions scattered across industrial zones. On the other hand, towers were obvious targets. Bomber groups often marked them on maps because they held some of the densest anti-aircraft firepower available to the Germans. As raids intensified, towers faced waves of attacks meant to overwhelm their guns. Each tower had only a few cannons, yet hundreds of aircraft often approached. Crews relied on discipline, careful aim, and coordination to create defensive fire capable of breaking up incoming formations. Firing from the top of a tower was very different from ground positions. Guns stood high above city streets, giving operators a clear view of the sky. When shells detonated, the sound bounced off concrete and echoed across districts. Recoil shook the roof, sending vibrations through the structure. Powder smoke drifted down stairwells, and warm brass casings rolled across metal grates. Pressure waves rattled lamps, shelves, and loose equipment. Civilians below described it as standing inside a thunderstorm of steel and fire. Despite the tower's strength, crews remained exposed. They worked in the open on the top platform, facing wind, cold, and shrapnel. Direct hits from bombers sometimes cracked concrete or shook the roof violently. Operators had to hold their positions as dust fell from overhead beams and alarms signaled structural damage. Because the guns were essential for city defense, withdrawal orders were rare. Most crews stayed at their posts until ammunition ran low or equipment failed. As Allied armies advanced on the ground, the role of towers expanded. They became not only anti-aircraft platforms, but also strongholds to slow enemy approaches. In Berlin and Vienna, towers sheltered thousands of civilians with nowhere else to go. Families slept in long corridors, while medics treated the injured in makeshift clinics. The sound of anti-aircraft fire above mixed with the distant rumble of artillery outside. For many, towers were the last safe refuge in the final battles. Their work protected not just factories or military targets, but desperate people beneath their feet. As supplies dwindled, conditions grew harsher. Ammunition shipments became irregular. Food and medical supplies ran short. Engineers, usually focused on maintenance, were now busy repairing damage from constant raids or ground shelling. Some crews rotated between long firing shifts and emergency repair duties, stretching themselves to the limit. Others slept beside the weapons, using spare cloth or empty crates as makeshift bedding. Many battled exhaustion, knowing that if the towers fell, thousands of civilians inside would be left unprotected. During the final battles for Berlin, the towers became some of the last functioning structures. Ground fighting reached the city's outskirts, and Soviet artillery targeted anything resembling a defensive strongpoint. Crews fired at aircraft, tanks, and infantry with whatever ammunition remained. Some guns failed after months of constant use, but operators improvised, adjusting angles manually or switching to backups. The sounds of urban combat echoed across rooftops as smoke rose from burning districts. Towers, once symbols of air defense, now stood as isolated islands amid chaos. When surrender came, surviving crews emerged into cities transformed by fire and destruction. Many walked down from towers with uniforms covered in dust and oil, carrying memories of months spent fighting without pause. They had served under some of the most dangerous conditions of any German military branch. A large portion of anti-aircraft personnel had been killed in action, often defending positions offering little protection. Casualties were especially high among young replacements who joined late in the war. In the aftermath, the towers remained as concrete reminders of the final stand. Some were partially demolished, while others became museums or storage sites. Visitors walking through empty rooms could still see thick walls scarred by shrapnel, narrow hallways that once held families, and steel mounts where guns had stood. The echoes of those last battles lingered, a quiet testament to crews who defended the skies until there was nothing left to defend. The story of the flak units ended not in victory, but in survival and memory. Their work slowed destruction, but could not stop a war already lost. What remained was the understanding that these crews, whether beneath vast concrete walls or beside exposed field guns, faced dangers few soldiers experienced. Their casualty rate reflected the brutal reality of a front where the enemy came from above, from ahead, and often from all directions at once.